That's garbage, and so is everything she ever touched. My uncle's voice cut through the dinner table like a blade. He wasn't whispering. He never whispered when he could perform. He held up the water-stained envelope my grandmother had pressed into my hand 3 days before she passed, pinching it between 2 fingers the way you'd hold something you found on the floor of a gas station bathroom. Then he dropped it into the centerpiece candle. The paper caught instantly. I didn't scream. I reached past my cousin's shoulder, knocked over 2 wine glasses, and snatched what was left before the flame could finish its work. The corner was gone. The wax seal had melted. But the envelope held. My hands shook, but my voice didn't. I wrapped it in my cloth napkin, tucked it under my arm, and looked at the 18 people sitting around that table. Not one of them said a word. Before I tell you what was inside that envelope and what I did with it, I want to ask you something. What is the most humiliating thing a family member has ever done to you, at a gathering where you had no choice but to smile? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. My name is Claire, and I am 32 years old. I teach 3rd grade at an elementary school in Hartford, Connecticut. I make $41,000 a year before taxes. I drive a 2014 Honda Civic with a cracked rear bumper, and I pack my lunch every single day because the sandwich shop across from school charges $9 for turkey on sourdough, and I cannot justify that. I know who I am. I have never pretended to be anything else. My uncle, on the other hand, has spent the better part of 30 years pretending to be everything. The family patriarch, the self-made man, the one who stepped up after my father died when I was 9, and my grandmother was left alone in that house on Birchwood Lane, with nothing but a widow's pension and a garden that needed tending. He stepped up. Yes, he stepped into her finances, her accounts, her decisions, her trust. He stepped in so thoroughly that by the time I was old enough to notice, there was nothing left for me to step into. I drove home from that dinner with the burned envelope on the passenger seat inside its napkin shroud. My husband Marcus was awake when I got in. He took one look at my face and set down his coffee. He didn't ask if I was okay. He asked what happened. That is one of the reasons I married him. Marcus is a forensic accountant. He finds the places where numbers are supposed to add up and don't. He works mostly with insurance companies and occasionally with federal agencies when they need someone who can read a balance sheet the way a detective reads a crime scene. He is quiet at parties. He alphabetizes the spice cabinet, and he once spent 4 hours on a Saturday untangling a client's shell corporation structure the way other people do jigsaw puzzles. For pleasure. I told him everything while he made me tea I didn't ask for. He held the envelope carefully by the edges, tilted it toward the lamp, and was quiet for a long time. Then he said, very calmly, "We need to get this to someone who handles estate documents. Tomorrow." I looked at him. He looked at me. He wasn't scared. He was thinking. And when Marcus thinks like that, with that particular stillness behind his eyes, it means he has already started seeing something the rest of us haven't noticed yet. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark, and I was not 32 years old. I was 9, sitting on the bottom step of my grandmother's porch while the adults talked inside about what would happen now. My father had been gone for 11 days. The house smelled like casseroles people had brought over, and my grandmother kept squeezing my hand too tight every time she walked by, like she was checking to make sure I was still there. My uncle had arrived on the 3rd day with a briefcase and an opinion about everything. He had opinions about the funeral arrangements, about which life insurance policy to file first, about the house, about my grandmother's checking account, about where I should go to school. He presented these opinions not as suggestions but as conclusions already reached, by someone more qualified, on behalf of people who were too grief-stricken to think clearly. My grandmother let him. I watched her let him, again and again, over the next 20 years. I used to think she was tired. Later I thought she was afraid. Now I think she was buying time. The estate attorney's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown that smelled of old wood and printer toner. I had called at 7 in the morning and spoken to a paralegal who heard the word estate and the word envelope and told me to come in at 10. The attorney herself was in her 60s, small and precise, with silver hair she wore clipped short. She set the envelope on a white cloth on her desk and looked at it the way a jeweler looks at a stone before declaring its worth. The outside of the envelope said, in my grandmother's careful, looping handwriting, "For Claire. Open only when you are ready." There was a date. It was 3 years ago. She had written it 3 years ago. She had been carrying it for 3 years, and handed it to me at the end. And my uncle had burned it in a centerpiece candle at a dinner table in front of 18 witnesses without reading a single word. The attorney put on gloves and opened what remained. She went very still. She read the first page, then the second, then turned to a folded document underneath. She looked at me over her reading glasses. Then she stood up and opened her office door and called to someone in the hallway. "I need you in here right now," she said quietly. What my grandmother had placed inside that envelope was a codicil, a legal amendment to her original will, notarized, witnessed, and dated. In it, she had directed that the entirety of the family property at Birchwood Lane, along with a separate investment account she had opened in her own name in 1991, be transferred to me upon her death. Not to the estate. Not to be managed by my uncle as the designated executor. Directly to me. The investment account had been opened with a single deposit. Over 30 years, it had compounded quietly, without fanfare, seated by a woman who clipped grocery coupons and reused plastic bags, who had watched her husband invest in things people told him were too boring to bother with, who had done the same after he was gone because no one thought to tell her not to. The attorney read the current value to me from the document. She said it twice because I did not respond the first time. $460,000. And the house on Birchwood Lane, which had been appraised 8 months ago at just over $300,000. There was a handwritten note tucked behind the legal document. I recognized my grandmother's handwriting immediately, the same hand that had signed every birthday card, every letter she sent to my college dormitory, every grocery list she left on the refrigerator door. It said, "I know what Gerald has been doing. I know I should have stopped it sooner. I couldn't protect your father from him, but I can protect you. Don't let him touch what I am leaving you. He will try. He always tries. But you are smarter than he thinks you are. You always have been." I sat in that leather chair in that office for a long time after the attorney finished speaking. The afternoon light had shifted. Marcus was next to me, and he had not said a single word, which is how I knew he had already known, or suspected, something close to this. He reached over and held my hand. That was all. The attorney said we needed to begin the process of contesting the estate as currently administered. She said the codicil was valid, the notarization was clean, and the witnesses were still living and reachable. She said my uncle had been operating as executor under the original will, which predated the codicil, and which made no specific provision for me beyond a few pieces of furniture and a piece of jewelry. She said the word irregular several times in a way that suggested she meant something stronger. She said I should not discuss this with any member of my family until we were prepared. I nodded. Marcus was already writing something in the small notebook he carries everywhere. I kept my phone on silent that whole first week. I went to school. I graded spelling tests. I read a book about a talking caterpillar to 8-year-olds who thought it was the best thing they had ever heard, and I smiled at them and meant it. I did not call my uncle. I did not attend the follow-up dinner my cousin texted to invite me to. I sent a simple reply about being busy and I let it sit. On the 9th day, my uncle called me. He had heard. I did not know how. The attorney said it was possible someone at the courthouse had talked, or that one of the codicil's witnesses had been contacted in the preliminary process and mentioned it. It didn't matter. He had heard, and he was calling me now. And when I answered, his voice was smooth and warm, the voice he used at Thanksgiving when he wanted to seem generous. He said he was worried about me. He said he knew I was grieving and not thinking clearly. He said that when people are in grief, they sometimes make decisions that seem right in the moment but cause a great deal of damage in the long run. He said family unity was the most important thing, especially now. He said my grandmother, God rest her, had been confused near the end. He said he had documents of his own, medical assessments, conversations recorded on his phone. He said if I pursued this legal matter, he would be forced to challenge my grandmother's mental competence in court, which would be ugly and expensive and would drag her memory through a process she never would have wanted. He said he was telling me this out of love. He said he was trying to protect me from myself. He said I was a school teacher, and he meant it as a diminishment. I let him talk. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold in front of me, and I let every word come through the phone, and I heard all of it. Not just what he was saying, but what was underneath it. The urgency, the way he moved too fast from concern to threat, the way the word documents came up before I had said anything at all about what I knew. He was afraid. He was calling because he needed to know how much I had, and threatening me was the fastest way he knew to find out. I did what I had learned from 32 years of watching him underestimate me. I let him think it was working. My voice went small. I let it. I said I didn't know what to do, that the attorney had shown me papers but I didn't fully understand them, that it all seemed overwhelming, that I hadn't slept properly in weeks, that I just wanted things to be simple. I said maybe he was right that grandmother had been confused. I said I didn't want a legal battle. I couldn't afford one. I didn't want to drag her name through anything. I said I was scared of doing the wrong thing. The shift in his voice was immediate. The warmth became efficient. He said I was making the right choice. He said he would handle everything. He said if I brought him the documents from the attorney's office, he could have his own legal team review them and we could resolve this quietly, within the family, the way grandmother would have wanted. He said there was a real estate investment event in 2 weeks, a dinner he attended every year with his business partners, and that we could meet there, in a private room, and go over everything together, somewhere comfortable and professional. He said he was doing this for me. I said thank you. I said he was the only family I had left. I let my voice break a little on the word family. After I hung up, I looked at Marcus. He had heard everything on speaker. He was already on his phone, typing something, his jaw set in a way that meant he had found what he was looking for. He turned the screen toward me. The investment account my uncle managed on behalf of the estate had seen significant distributions over the past 8 years. To a holding company, to a property management LLC, to a personal account in my uncle's name that was not disclosed in the original estate filing. The numbers were not small. He wasn't just trying to block the codicil. He needed to, because if the estate was examined properly, the examination wouldn't stop at the codicil. It would go deeper. He had been pulling from accounts he was trusted to protect for nearly a decade. He needed me to sign away my inheritance quietly and go home. Not because he was greedy in the ordinary way, but because my grandmother's estate, properly audited, would unwind everything. Marcus said, very quietly. He overplayed his hand when he threatened you. He needed you scared and silent, not investigating. Now he needs you to walk through a door he's going to set on fire the moment you step away. We spent 5 days with the attorney preparing 2 separate sets of documents. The first was what my uncle expected. A withdrawal of contest, a release of claim, a standard form that would undo the codicil and return the estate to his management. We had our graphic designer replicate the formatting precisely. Same fonts, same header, same footer. But the signature block at the bottom was not a release of claim. It was a sworn attestation that he had personally reviewed, managed, and accepted full fiduciary responsibility for every transaction made from the estate account since my grandmother's death. Every distribution, every transfer, every dollar moved to the holding company with his name on it. Every dollar moved to himself. If he signed it, he was signing a document that could be submitted directly to the probate court and the state attorney general's office as a voluntary admission of conduct. The second set of documents was the real one. Those we kept with the attorney. The real estate investment dinner was held at a hotel ballroom in downtown Hartford, the kind of event with name tags on lanyards and past appetizers and a podium with a microphone. My uncle was a presenting sponsor. His photo was in the printed program. He looked exactly like himself. Tan, expensive suit, the smile of a man who has never once doubted that the room belongs to him. I arrived early. I was not wearing the kind of clothes he expected me in. I had borrowed a blazer from a friend who works in finance, and I wore it with the posture I use on the first day of school when I need 28-year-olds to understand immediately that the classroom is mine. I signed in at the registration table. I found my seat. I ordered water. My cousin arrived 20 minutes later and stopped when he saw me. He looked confused, then arranged his face into something friendly. He had my uncle's eyes. He had always had my uncle's eyes. When he was 16 and I was 14, he told me in front of his friends that my dad had died because the universe was correcting a mistake. I had never forgotten it. I had also never mentioned it, because I understood even at 14 that people like my cousin did not say things like that out of cruelty alone. They said them because they had been taught, carefully and over many years, that certain people were not worth the cost of basic consideration. I nodded at him. I smiled. I had nothing to say to him that would matter tonight. My uncle found me near the end of the cocktail hour. He touched my elbow from behind in the way that people who grew up with money learn to touch others, as if contact is a currency they can extend as a favor. He steered me toward a small conference room off the main hall. His attorney was already inside, a younger man with the look of someone billing $400 an hour and deeply grateful for it. "Did you bring everything?" my uncle asked. "I brought what you asked for," I said. I set the folder on the table between us. My voice was careful. I kept my eyes slightly unfocused, the way I had practiced, looking like someone who is out of their depth in a room of people who know more. It wasn't hard. I had played that role for most of my life. He opened the folder. He went through the pages quickly, the way someone goes through a document when they are not reading it but looking for the signature line. His attorney glanced at it more carefully, and for one moment I felt the floor shift beneath me, because the attorney's eyes slowed on the 3rd page. I held still. I held so still. My uncle reached across and said, "Here," and pointed to the line. His attorney looked up at him. My uncle said something with his eyes that I could not read but understood as "keep moving." He uncapped a pen. He signed. He initialed the attestation clauses on page 2 without reading them. He handed the folder back to me with the satisfied look of a man who had just resolved a small inconvenience. I stood up. I thanked him. I said I just wanted it to be over. He nodded and put his hand on my shoulder and said he was proud of me for being practical. He said my grandmother would have understood. I walked back into the ballroom. I went to the far side of the room near the bar. I took a photo of every signed page. I forwarded them to the attorney. The message back took less than 3 minutes. Received. Filing tonight. Marcus was parked outside. He texted me as the keynote began. AG's office confirmed receipt. Probate court filing accepted. It's done. My uncle took the microphone 40 minutes later to thank the organizing committee and announce his firm's continued commitment to community investment. He spoke for 6 minutes. He said the word legacy 4 times. He said that what we build is what we leave behind, and that he had spent his career ensuring that the families of this region had access to the resources they deserved. He said he was proud to stand in rooms like this one, among people who understood that real wealth was not inherited but created. I was standing near the back. I did not start walking toward the exit until I heard him say the word inherited. Then I left. Not because I couldn't watch, because I didn't need to. 3 weeks later, I received a letter from the probate court confirming the transfer of the Birchwood Lane property and the full balance of the investment account into my name. Marcus framed the letter. I told him that was excessive. He put it on the refrigerator. I left it there. My cousin called once, about 10 days after the filing. He said I had betrayed the family. He said what I had done was unforgivable. He said my grandmother would be ashamed of me. I let him finish. Then I said that my grandmother had written me a letter, and in that letter she had called me smarter than anyone gave me credit for, and that she had spent 3 years making sure that was true on a legal document, and that I would carry that for the rest of my life, in a way that had nothing to do with the money. He hung up. I didn't call back. The house on Birchwood Lane needed work. The gutters were full. The paint on the back porch was peeling, and there was a window in the second bedroom that wouldn't seal properly against the cold. I drove there on a Saturday in November and sat in the driveway for a long time before I went in. The garden was overgrown. The key still worked. The house smelled exactly the same as it always had, like old wood and something faintly floral that I could never name. I walked through every room. I touched the banister my grandmother had painted white the year my grandfather died, because she said the house needed to look like something good was still possible. I sat on the bottom step of the back porch, where I had sat at 9 years old while the adults decided the shape of my life without asking me. The yard was still there. The maple tree my father had carved his initials into when he was 12 was still there. I put my hand on the bark and stood there until I felt something unknot in my chest that had been wound tight for a very long time. Marcus came around the corner with 2 cups of coffee and sat down on the step beside me. He handed me one without saying anything. We looked at the yard and the overgrown garden and the tree with my father's initials in it. "What do you want to do with it?" he asked eventually. I wrapped both hands around the cup. I thought about what I was, without the money. A 3rd-grade teacher in Connecticut who packs her lunch and drives a car with a cracked bumper and reads books about caterpillars to children who believe with their whole hearts that the caterpillar is talking to them directly. I thought about what I was going to be, with it. I said, I want to fix the window first, then the gutters. Then I want to plant something in the garden before spring, so it's there when she would have wanted it to be there. Marcus nodded. He took out his notebook, the small one he carries everywhere, and wrote that down. Then he looked up at me. And the rest? I looked at the maple tree. I thought about my grandmother sitting in her kitchen 30 years ago, opening an account at a small bank, depositing a check for an amount that probably seemed modest at the time, and then simply not touching it, not moving it, not telling anyone, not asking for credit, just letting it be what it would become, quietly, over decades, for someone she loved who would need it later. Let it grow, I said. I'm still a teacher. I'm still Claire. The account is not who I am. It's what she believed I was worth when no one else was paying attention. My uncle was formally charged 4 months after the filing. The probate audit expanded into an investigation that went back 9 years and covered 3 separate accounts. His attorney negotiated. His assets were frozen pending resolution. The house he had bought in his wife's name was not protected from the civil judgment. My cousin took a job in another city. I heard about it through someone who had been at that dinner, who sent me a text that said simply, "Good. I teach school on Birchwood Lane now." I mean that literally. I transferred to the district where my grandmother had lived for 50 years. And I drive to work past the maple tree in her yard, which is my yard, every morning. My students are 8 years old and they believe in talking caterpillars and the justice of stories where the right person ends up with what belongs to them. I believe in those things too. I have the letter to prove it. The money is still mostly in the account. It's growing the way she meant it to grow, not because I need it to be, because she planted it for a reason. And I am not in the habit of uprooting things that took 30 years to become themselves. What my uncle did not understand, what men like him never seem to understand, is that dismissing someone is not the same as defeating them. He dropped that envelope into a candle and walked back to his dinner, assuming the thing was settled. He had done what he always did, which was to take up space and make noise until everyone else moved aside. He had no framework for a version of events in which I had been watching him, quietly, from the bottom step, for 23 years, and simply waiting until I had something real enough to carry to an attorney's office and put on a white cloth table. My grandmother knew. She always knew. She just needed to make sure I knew too. There was a phrase she used to say when I was young and something had gone wrong and I was trying not to cry about it. She would put her hands on both sides of my face and look at me the way she looked at her garden in early April, like she was already seeing something the rest of the world hadn't arrived at yet, and she would say, "Patience is not the same as giving up. Give it time. Give it room. Let it do what it's going to do." I think about that every morning when I drive past the maple tree. I think about it every time I stand in front of 22 8-year-olds who are still deciding what kind of people they're going to be. I think about a woman who spent 30 years quietly building something she never told anyone about, and who wrote a letter in her careful looping handwriting and tucked it inside an envelope and held it for 3 years until the moment was right. She knew. She always knew.